Old Abe gave them 90 days, and that was long enough for them to come to terms and save their property and Negroes. But it seems like they wanted to go the whole hog or none. Now I think it is perfectly right to take the hog and leave them none. And then if they ain't satisfied, I am in for banishing every rebel and rebel sympathizer from the U.S. I am a whole soul Union man and believe in giving the rebels a lesson to be remembered in after generations. Then we will never be troubled with civil war again. He's talking about the precise terms of the Emancipation Proclamation here. The Emancipation Proclamation issued on September 22nd is actually more properly the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, and what it says is that the slaves in the states that are still in rebellion against the Union as of January 1st, 1863, will be freed. And so essentially it's an ultimatum delivered to states in rebellion. And the reverse of it would say, therefore, if you return to the Union before January 1st, 1863, your slaves won't be freed. And the proclamation says that because it is operating in the context of a constitution that protects slavery. And so the Emancipation Proclamation can only justify itself as a war measure. So what he is saying is Lincoln gave the states 90 days to come back. He gives them a chance to retain slavery, and if they won't take that chance, if their demands in terms of greater protection for slavery are more important to them than coming back in the Union and keeping slavery where it is, then they made their own bed and let them lie in it. By the time Barney writes this letter, he has no qualms at all about confiscating the property of even non-combatants. As he sees it, now the only thing that's going to end this war is to take a much harder line, to take away the root of the war. And in the next paragraph, he wants to assure his brother-in-law that I'm not some wild-eyed abolitionist here. I'm not a crazy reformer. This is, in fact, what most of us hardened, commonsensical soldiers think. He says, well, I think I gave you a very good sample of the opinions of myself and comrades. I think the next paragraph is a good clue into the sort of limits of growing emancipation sentiment among the Union Army. In other words, he is all for ending slavery, but ending slavery is quite different, in his view, from increasing rights of former slaves for anything approaching racial equality. You see that when he says, P.S. I am not in favor of freeing the Negroes and leaving them to run free and mingle among us. Neither is such the intention of Old Abe, but we will send them off and colonize them. The government is already making preparations for the same, and you may be assured it will be carried into effect. So he doesn't know what to become of former slaves, but he certainly doesn't want them living among his own friends and family in the North. He refers to a passage in the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation that does not mandate but suggests as a possible outcome for former slaves. Maybe they'd be happier if we sent them back to Africa or to some place in South America and they could start their own society. By the time of the final proclamation, all reference to colonization has been omitted. Slavery was Southern, but prejudice was nationwide. And so colonization was sort of a way of coping with the tension between the insistence that we really need to get rid of slavery and uncertainty about what do we do with real slaves. The Confederate soldier is named John White. He is part of the Army of Northern Virginia, which is the fabled army of Robert E. Lee. And he is writing from Fredericksburg, Virginia in late November of 1862. So he's essentially writing while Union forces are getting ready to try and take Fredericksburg. It's cold, it's miserable, it's wet. His letter may or may not make it outside battle lines. He's writing to his wife. There are armies in her backyard. Moreover, White's wife lives in a part of the state where there are slaves, and there is a terror that the war is going to inspire a slave insurrection. Those fears are present from the very beginning of the war, but at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation, they become even more acute. There's more uncertainty, and there's a lot more worry in his letter. Even though militarily the war's going a lot better for his side at this time than it is for Barney's side. The Confederacy is very centralized, much more centralized than the Union. The Confederate government nationalizes the economy to a much greater degree than the Union could even dream of doing. And there's major disagreement about whether the Confederate state has any authority to do this. The reason why that disagreement doesn't spill over into a massive rush to rejoin the Union is all that stuff stinks, but it's not as bad as the Union. And I think that's the calculus that goes on in the minds of most Confederate soldiers. And it's not liking the Union more than liking or feeling any attachment to the Confederacy that keeps the Confederate Army in the ranks. Civilians are ready to throw in the towel a lot earlier than soldiers are. He starts off by talking about local neighbors, and he explains that that's how he got some letters from his wife and is able to send some letters to her. But then he hasn't even gone through the state of his health or the health of all their children or their friends at home before he gets to his concerns about the possibility of slave insurrection. So his two main concerns right from the outset are, one, we can't be in touch with each other as much as I would like us to be, and two, you're worried and I'm worried about slave uprising.